The first thing to hit the floor was a leather-bound book. Its cover faded by time. It did not fall on its own. It was swept from the shelf by the arm of a man who, in all of his 35 years of life, had never once been denied anything. The second book fell after it, then the third. Then an entire row of books came crashing down like a line of broken dominoes, their spines split open, their yellowed pages scattering across the wooden floor. The ink bottle on the table tipped over, and the black liquid spread slowly like a wound that couldn't be made to stop bleeding. 4 men in black suits stood along the wall. Not one of them moved. And the woman behind the cashier's counter, she did not scream. She did not beg. She did not step back even half a pace. She only stood there. Her emerald eyes fixed directly on the man, destroying everything she had. With a silence so heavy that it forced him to stop. Behind the old curtain, a small figure was hiding. 6 years old, blonde curls, holding a worn, stuffed cat tightly, lips trembling as the child fought back a sob. But the tears couldn't be held back. Dominic Ashford stood in the middle of the wreckage. He lifted his head and looked into the woman's eyes. She was not afraid of him, and that unsettled him more than any threat ever could. He turned and walked out, thinking he had won. He did not know that only 4 hours later, in the hospital room where his father lay, he would see a photograph in the medical file. The woman who had donated an organ to save his father's life 3 years earlier, a face exactly like the girl in the bookshop, her mother. And Dominic would come to understand one thing. There are debts that cannot be repaid with money, and there are mistakes that cannot be corrected with power. Press like if you want to know what happens next. Share this with someone who needs to remember that kindness is never forgotten, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories still waiting for you. The door of the SUV slammed shut behind him. Dominic Ashford lowered himself into the leather seat. His eyes fixed straight ahead, though he was not truly seeing anything. His hands rested on his thighs, and he realized they were trembling slightly, not from fear. Dominic Ashford did not know what fear was. He had faced the barrel of a gun, enemies who wanted him dead, even long nights when he did not know whether he would live to see the next morning, but never had his hands trembled like this. And he did not understand why. The vehicle pulled away, leaving behind the old street where the little bookshop still stood with the wreckage he had just caused. Yet no matter how much distance grew between them, he couldn't drive the image from his mind. Emerald eyes. A silence as heavy as stone. The way she had stood there without retreating, without shaking, without begging, even as he destroyed everything she had. Why was she not afraid? The question kept circling through Dominic's mind like a melody he couldn't escape. He was used to seeing fear in the eyes of others. He lived by that fear. He had built an empire upon that fear. But that woman had looked at him as though he were nothing at all, as though he were only a passing wind, causing a little disturbance before disappearing. That made him angry. Or was it unease? He was no longer sure. The phone in his jacket pocket began to vibrate. Dominic glanced at the screen and saw Marcus's name. He answered, "Boss." Marcus's voice was clipped as always. "We have a problem. Vincent Kane just sent men to the hospital. They were asking about Mr. Maxwell's condition." Dominic felt his jaw tighten. Vincent Kane. The name cut through his dull headache like the edge of a knife. Kane controlled the northern side of the city, and for a long time he had been eyeing Dominic's territory. His father being in the hospital was not news Kane should have known. But in this world no secret stayed hidden forever. "Double the security," Dominic said, his voice as cold as steel. "No one gets into my father's room without my permission. Even the doctors are to be checked first." "Understood, boss." And Marcus. Dominic paused for a beat. "If Kane sends men again, I want to know who they are before they even make it out of the hospital." The call ended. Dominic looked out the car window. The city streamed backward in blurred streaks of color. Towering buildings, crowded streets, all of it belonging to him in one way or another. Dominic Ashford, 35 years old, the man who controlled half the city. He held in his hands deals worth millions of dollars, men ready to die at his command, secrets that could bring even the most powerful families to ruin. He had risen from the ashes his father left behind when illness brought the old man down, and he had preserved that empire through ruthlessness without mercy. But today, a woman in an old bookshop had looked at him as though none of it meant a thing. Dominic leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He told himself she was only a small obstacle, a piece of land that needed to be bought, a problem that needed to be solved. He would find another way. He would force her to sell in ways she couldn't refuse. He was Dominic Ashford. He always found a way. But deep inside, in the place he never allowed anyone to touch, Dominic knew he was lying to himself, because the image of those emerald eyes would not disappear simply because he wanted it to. And the broken sobs of the child behind the curtain would follow him into his dreams tonight. The SUV turned onto the road leading to the hospital. Dominic had a father waiting for him and an enemy lurking in the shadows. As for that little bookshop, he would return soon. The wooden door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the silence of the bookshop. The growl of the SUV engine faded into the distance, then disappeared into the restless noise of the city outside. All that remained was stillness and ruin. Elena Morrison still stood behind the cashier's counter, both hands gripping the edge of the oak so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. During the entire time that man had been tearing her shop apart, she had not trembled. She had not cried. She had not taken a single step back. But now, with him gone, with no one left before whom she had to remain strong, Elena allowed her body to shake, her knees weakened, and she had to cling to the counter to keep from falling. Her breathing came fast and broken, as if she had just run a marathon rather than stood motionless for the past 10 minutes. She closed her eyes and tried to steady herself. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. She was used to this by now. Used to standing upright when everything around her collapsed. Used to being strong when there was no one left to lean on. For the past 5 years, since her ex-husband walked away, she had been forced to learn how to be a rock for her daughter. And for the past 3 years, since her mother died, she had been forced to learn how to be a rock for herself. Elena opened her eyes and looked down at the floor of the shop. Books lay scattered everywhere like leaves after a storm. Broken spines, yellowed pages strewn in every direction, and the black stain of ink was still spreading slowly across the wooden floor, like a wound that would not stop bleeding. She released the counter and slowly knelt down. Her hand reached for a leather-bound book. The first one swept from the shelf. Its spine had cracked, but the pages inside were still intact. She ran her fingers gently over the split, as softly as if she were soothing an injury on living flesh. This was her mother's favorite book, an old edition of Little Women, its brown leather cover worn smooth by time, its pages yellowed, and carrying the unmistakable scent of old paper. Her mother used to say that every book had a soul, and the soul of this one was resilience. Now it rested in Elena's hands, wounded but not destroyed. Mother. The tiny voice came from behind her. Elena turned and saw Sophie standing at the edge of the curtain, her eyes red, tear tracks still glistening on her cheeks, her arms wrapped tightly around her stuffed cat. Captain Whiskers. The little girl ran to her and threw herself into her mother's arms, her small hands clinging tightly around Elena's neck. Mother, grandmother's books. Those men ruined them all. Sophie's voice broke and her small body trembled in her mother's embrace. Elena held her close, one hand stroking the golden curls of her daughter's hair. Her voice calm and warm even as her heart was breaking apart. It's all right, sweetheart. Books can be repaired. I will mend every one of them. She kissed the top of Sophie's head and breathed in the familiar scent of children's shampoo. Were you frightened? Sophie nodded, her face still buried in her mother's shoulder. Those men were so mean. I was afraid they would hurt you. Elena held her more tightly. They will not hurt me and they will not come back. You don't need to worry. She said it. But deep down she knew it might have been a lie. That man Dominic Ashford would return. Men like him always returned. They did not accept refusal. They did not understand the meaning of no. Elena remembered the final afternoon with her mother 3 years earlier, just before the last time she was admitted to the hospital. Victoria Morrison had been lying in the old armchair in the bookshop, her body wasted by illness, but her eyes were still bright and gentle. She had held her daughter's hand, her voice weak but resolute. "Hold on to this shop, Elena. It is not only books. It is the soul of our family. It is the place your grandmother built with her own 2 hands. It is the place where I grew up. It is the place where you first made your memories with books." She had paused, struggling for breath, then continued. "And remember, my dear, kindness is never lost. It only travels in circles." Elena had not understood what her mother meant at the time. She often said things like that, words layered with meaning that Elena only came to understand long afterward, but she had made a promise. She had promised that she would keep the bookshop no matter what happened. Sophie had grown calmer now. She sat on the floor and began helping her mother gather the books. Elena looked at her daughter, then around the shop. Her gaze came to rest on the work table in the corner where a stack of bills lay waiting. Her mother's hospital expenses, the rent, electricity and water. Food for herself and her daughter. The numbers kept piling on top of one another like stones pressing down on her shoulders every single day. She could sell the shop. That man, Dominic Ashford, had offered a sum she knew was many times greater than the true worth of this place. She could sell it, pay off every debt, and begin again somewhere else. That would have been the sensible thing. That was what anyone in her position would have done. But Elena couldn't. To sell this shop would mean selling her mother's soul, selling the only inheritance that 3 generations of women in her family had built together, selling the only place where she still felt that her mother remained beside her. Elena rose to her feet, lifted Sophie into her arms, and set her on the cashier's counter. "Sit here while I get the cleaning things." Sophie nodded, holding Captain Whiskers against her chest. Elena looked once more at the black stain on the floor. It had stopped spreading, but the blot remained dark and ugly against the pale wood, like a scar, like so many other scars life had left upon her. She whispered so softly that only she herself could hear it. "I will not give up, Mother, no matter what happens." St. Augustine Medical Center at night carried a kind of stillness that was almost unsettling. The hallways were long and stark white, washed in the cold glow of fluorescent lights with a faint scent of antiseptic drifting through the air. Dominic Ashford walked quickly past the 2 bodyguards, standing watch at the end of the corridor, gave them a slight nod, then pushed open the door and stepped into the room. It was a large private room fitted with every comfort money could buy. Yet no comfort could conceal the truth that the man lying in the bed was growing weaker with each passing day. Maxwell Ashford, 65 years old, once the most feared man in this city, now looked thin and pale against the white hospital sheets. The machines around him gave off their steady signals, tracking every heartbeat, every breath. Dominic stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his father sleep. Each time he came here, the old man seemed a little thinner, a little weaker, and each time Dominic felt a little more helpless. He could buy this entire city if he wanted to, but he couldn't buy more time for his father. Maxwell opened his eyes as though he had sensed his son's presence. He gave a faint smile, one that made the lines in his face seem deeper. "Son, why do you look so tense?" Dominic pulled a chair closer to the bed, sat down, and took his father's frail hand in his own. "It is nothing, just work." His voice was softer than usual, trying to hide everything spinning through his mind. The bookshop, the emerald eyes, Vincent Kane. None of those things belonged in this room. Maxwell looked at him with the knowing gaze of a man who had lived too long in darkness, not to recognize when someone was hiding something. But he did not ask any further questions. Instead, he looked up at the ceiling, his voice low and distant. 3 years ago, when I was close to dying, someone gave me a second chance. Dominic said nothing. He knew this story. 3 years earlier, his father's liver had begun to fail, and there had been no suitable donor on the waiting list. The doctors had said he had only a few weeks left. Then, one day, as if by a miracle, they found an anonymous donor. That person had been a perfect match for Maxwell, and the surgery had saved his life. They did not want gratitude. Maxwell continued. his voice growing softer. They did not want anything. No money, no name, nothing at all. They simply gave as though my life was worth their sacrifice without asking for anything in return. He paused, breathing with difficulty. Sometimes I wonder whether I deserved that sacrifice. I did many wrong things, Dominic. Far too many. Perhaps more than you know. Dominic tightened his hold on his father's hand. You deserved it. His voice was firm. You are my father. For me that is enough. Maxwell smiled and his eyes slowly closed again. You are the only thing I ever did right in my life, son. Then he drifted back to sleep, his breathing settling into an even rhythm beneath the steady sounds of the machines. Dominic remained there for a little while longer, watching his father sleep. Then he rose, preparing to leave. Just then, the door opened and a nurse stepped inside, carrying a file. She set it on the table beside the bed, checked the readings on the machines, then hurried out again as though 100 other duties were waiting for her. The file lay on the table, clipped together unevenly, with part of the paperwork inside left exposed. Dominic was about to call the nurse back and tell her to fix it, but his eyes happened to pass over what was showing, a photograph, and he froze where he stood. The face in the picture belonged to a middle-aged woman somewhere in her 50s, with auburn hair and an unmistakable calm. That face was so familiar that Dominic's heart seemed to stop for a beat. Not because he had ever met this woman, but because he had just met someone who looked exactly like her, only 20 years younger. He picked up the file, his hand trembling slightly. This was his father's anonymous donor file, one he should never have been allowed to see. But someone had been careless, and now it was in his hands. He read the name Victoria Morrison, anonymous organ donor. Contact address Morrison and Page's bookshop. Dominic sank into the chair behind him, his face drained of color. Morrison, the bookshop, the woman with the emerald eyes. All the pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed made him feel sick. He left the hospital like a shadow, moving quickly through the corridor without looking at anyone. The moment he got into the car, he called Marcus. I need everything on Victoria Morrison. Everything right now. His voice was cold and hard, but beneath it was something even he did not recognize. Fear. Not fear of someone or something. Fear of himself. Fear of what he had done. An hour later the phone rang. Marcus gave his report in his usual matter-of-fact tone, unaware that every word he spoke was driving another nail into the coffin of Dominic's conscience. Victoria Morrison died 3 years ago of heart failure. 1 week before her death, she registered as an organ donor. Her liver was a perfect match for Maxwell Ashford. The only condition her family requested was absolute secrecy regarding the donor's identity. They wanted no money, no gratitude, nothing at all. Her only daughter, Elena Morrison, 30 years old, is a single mother to a 6-year-old girl and is carrying a crushing burden of medical debt from her mother's treatment. She is currently living and working at Morrison and Page's bookshop, the bookshop her family has built over 3 generations. Dominic sat in the car staring down at his own hands. The hands that had swept books from the shelves. The hands that had destroyed the legacy of the woman who saved his father's life. Marcus's voice came through the phone. You still there? Dominic did not answer. Maybe not everyone has a price, boss. Marcus added, and for once there was something unusual in his tone. Perhaps sarcasm. Perhaps disappointment. Dominic did not know and he did not care. He ended the call and sat in the darkness of the car, parked in the hospital lot. That night, Dominic Ashford did not sleep. He lay in bed in his penthouse, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, while the image of those emerald eyes kept returning. But this time, they no longer filled him with anger or unease. They filled him with shame, a feeling Dominic Ashford had thought he had forgotten a very long time ago. The next morning, Dominic Ashford stood in front of Morrison and Page's bookshop for the second time in less than 24 hours. But this time everything was different. There was no convoy of gleaming black SUVs, no 4 men in suits standing along the walls. There was only him alone in a simple gray coat, standing on the sidewalk and staring at the old wooden door of the bookshop as though it were the gate to a place he did not know how to enter. He had been standing there for nearly 10 minutes already. A man accustomed to commanding hundreds of people, accustomed to facing the most dangerous enemies, now hesitating in front of a small bookshop. It was absurd, but Dominic couldn't laugh. He drew in a deep breath and then pushed the door open and stepped inside. Inside the shop, Elena Morrison was kneeling on the wooden floor, her back to the door. She was carefully taping the spine of a torn book back together, her hands moving with a gentle patience as though she were tending to a living creature. Beside her, Sophie sat cross-legged, helping her mother place the repaired books into a cardboard box. The little girl still held Captain Whiskers in her lap, as though the stuffed cat were a protective charm she could never let go of. The black ink stain on the floor had been scrubbed clean, but it still left behind a faint mark, like a scar that could never be erased completely. The bell hanging over the door gave a soft ring when Dominic entered. Elena lifted her head, and the moment she realized who was standing there, her body went still. She rose slowly to her feet, her eyes never leaving him, and when she spoke, her voice was cold as ice. "The shop is still not for sale." Dominic remained where he was, not coming any closer. "I did not come to buy it." Silence. Elena looked at him, trying to read the intention hidden behind those cold gray eyes. He had not brought anyone with him. He did not carry the same violent edge he had worn the day before. But that did not mean he was not dangerous. Men like him were always dangerous. Whether they carried a weapon or not, she stepped to one side, placing herself in front of Sophie, the protective instinct of a mother stronger than any fear. "Then why are you here?" Her voice did not tremble, but her emerald eyes were watchful, ready for whatever might come next. Dominic looked at her, then down at the child peeking out from behind her mother, those wide eyes watching him with more curiosity than fear. He took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice had changed. It was no longer cold, no longer threatening. There was only weariness and something close to surrender. "I saw the file at the hospital. Your mother, Victoria Morrison. She saved my father's life." The air itself seemed to go still. Elena did not move. And for the first time since Dominic had met her, he saw something stir in those emerald eyes. Not fear, not anger, but a deep pain buried for far too long. Suddenly disturbed. "You should not know that." Her voice was quieter now. "The only condition my mother asked for was secrecy." "How did you?" "Someone was careless." Dominic cut in. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is that I know now, and I know what I have done." He looked around the bookshop at the shelves still standing half empty, at the torn books waiting to be repaired, at the faded stain of ink on the floor. He had caused all of this. To the daughter of the woman whose sacrifice had saved his father, Elena watched him, and she realized that his face looked different today. Yesterday he had been like a wild beast, unable to control his rage. Today, he looked like a man who had just been shaken awake from a fever dream and had finally seen what he had done in his sleep. But that changed nothing. "My mother believed that kindness doesn't need to be acknowledged." Elena's voice had grown calm again, though a note of sorrow lay deep beneath it. She did not want gratitude to become a burden on anyone. She only wanted to help without asking for anything in return. She paused for a moment. "That is why I kept it secret. And that is also why I cannot sell this bookshop. It is her legacy. It is the only thing of hers that I still have. Do you understand?" Dominic understood. He understood more than she imagined because he too was trying to hold on to his father at any cost. "I will pay off all of your medical debt," he said. "I will restore the entire bookshop. I will redesign the project so this land is no longer needed. I will do whatever it takes to make amends." Elena shook her head slowly but with finality. "I don't want your money. I want you to leave this place and leave us in peace." "But did you hear what I said?" Her voice sharpened. "My mother did not do what she did in order to be repaid, and I don't need you turning her sacrifice into a transaction. Please just go." Dominic stood in the middle of the bookshop, and for the first time in his life, he did not know what to say. He had negotiated with the most dangerous enemies. He had persuaded the most stubborn partners. But in front of this woman, with her emerald eyes full of resolve and pain, he was utterly powerless. He gave a faint nod, turned and walked toward the door. But before he pushed open the wooden door, he stopped and spoke without turning back. "I will not force you to sell, but I will come back." Then he stepped outside, the door closing behind him, the bell giving one soft chime before falling silent. Elena stood there watching after him, unable to understand what he meant to do. He would come back for what? To continue threatening her or to do something else? She did not know, and she was not sure she wanted to. "Mother!" Sophie's voice came softly from behind her. Elena turned and looked at her daughter, whose small face was lifted with innocent curiosity. "Mother!" He looked sad. Elena did not answer. She only knelt down and drew her daughter into her arms and wondered why a 6-year-old child could see the things grown adults tried so hard to ignore. The northern warehouse quarter at night was an entirely different world from the rest of the city. There were no blazing neon lights, no roar of traffic, only old warehouses lying motionless in the dark, and the sound of wind whistling through rusted iron frames in a warehouse at the end of the dirt road. A weak yellow light slipped through the gaps in the corrugated metal roof, like eyes peering out into the night. Inside, Vincent Kane sat at the head of a long wooden table, surrounded by 6 men with cold faces and weary eyes. Kane was 47 years old, his salt and pepper hair combed straight back, his angular face marked by a faint scar running along the left side of his jaw. His eyes were a cloudy gray, always carrying the chill of calculation, like a snake waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, and now it was coming. "Dominic Ashford is distracted," Kane said, his voice low and deliberate, every word measured carefully before it left his mouth. "His father has been in the hospital for 9 months. The old man's health grows weaker by the day. He has to divide his attention between running an empire and caring for his father. This is the perfect time for us to strike." The men around the table nodded, but none of them dared speak while Kane was still talking. He hated being interrupted. One of his men, the one seated closest to him, cleared his throat and spoke. "Sir, we found something interesting." Kane lifted an eyebrow and motioned for him to continue. "Ashford has taken an interest in a small bookshop on the old street. The shop is called Morrison and Page's." "A bookshop?" Kane repeated, his tone edged with suspicion. "Yes, he went there twice in 2 days, alone, no bodyguards. The first time he trashed the place, apparently trying to force the owner to sell. But the second time he went alone, stood there talking to the woman who owns it, then left. No signs of violence, no signs of threats." Kane rested his chin on one hand, and his cloudy gray eyes lit up with interest. Dominic Ashford, the coldest kingpin in the city, the man who never showed emotion, never let anyone see a weakness, suddenly taking an interest in a tiny bookshop and an ordinary woman. There was nothing ordinary about that. "Find out more," Kane ordered, a cold smile spreading across his lips. "Find out who that woman is, what connection she has to Ashford, and why he cares about her. Every strong man has an Achilles heel. It seems we may finally have found Dominic Ashford's." That same night, nearly half a city away from the northern warehouse quarter, Dominic Ashford sat in a black sedan, parked across the street from Morrison and Page's bookshop. He had been sitting there for almost an hour, watching the lights inside the shop go out one by one. First the lights on the ground floor where the bookshop was. Then the lights on the second floor, probably the sitting room or the kitchen. At last, only a faint night light remained glowing in a small window, most likely the child's room, Sophie. The little girl had eyes exactly like her mother's. The phone in Dominic's jacket pocket began to vibrate. He looked at the screen, then answered. "Boss." Marcus's voice came through. "Kane is making unusual moves. His men are watching you. They know you went to the bookshop twice." Dominic did not look surprised. He had suspected this for some time. Kane had eyes and ears all over the city, and Dominic never underestimated his enemies. I know, he replied. Then why do you keep coming here? Marcus asked, a note of concern in his voice. Alone without protection. If Kane wants to make a move, this is the perfect opportunity. Dominic did not answer at once. He looked up at the second-floor window where the nightlight was still glowing faintly. A single mother and a 6-year-old child were sleeping in there, unaware that their lives were being drawn into a war they knew nothing about. Send men to watch this area, Dominic said quietly. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Don't let anyone suspicious get near the bookshop. Boss Marcus hesitated. Is she really that important? Important enough for you to take this kind of risk? Dominic was silent for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on the softly lit window. It is not her, he said at last. It is the debt I carry. He ended the call, started the engine, and drove off into the night. He did not know that on the other side of the city, Vincent Kane was smiling at the information he had just received. Kane was searching for Ashford's weakness, and Dominic had just, without meaning to, revealed a new one. The hidden war had begun, and the woman with the emerald eyes and the little daughter sleeping peacefully in the bookshop had no idea that they had become pieces on a chessboard in a game they had never chosen to enter. In the first week after that meeting, Elena opened the bookshop one morning and found a middle-aged man waiting outside, standing beside a toolbox and several new wooden boards. He smiled politely and introduced himself as a carpenter who had been hired to repair the damaged bookshelves. Elena shook her head at once. I did not hire anyone. You have the wrong place. The carpenter scratched his head, looking embarrassed. Miss Morrison, I have already been paid. Paid in full in advance. If you don't let me work, I still have to stand here all day. That is what he said. Elena did not need to ask who he was. She wanted to send the carpenter away. Wanted to call Dominic Ashford and tell him that she did not need his help. But then she looked at the crooked shelves, the broken wooden boards. She had no money to replace, and she knew she was lying to herself. She did need help. She just did not want to accept it from the man who had caused the damage in the first place. But in the end, practicality won over pride. She stepped aside and let the carpenter enter. And for the rest of that day, she tried to behave as though he did not exist while he worked steadily, repairing each shelf one by one. The second week began with a wooden crate appearing in front of the shop. Elena opened it and found 5 antique books inside. Rare editions that any lover of books would have coveted, a first printing of The Secret Garden, a 19th-century leather-bound copy of Sense and Sensibility, and 3 others whose value Elena knew could equal half a year's rent. There was no card, no note, but she knew where they had come from. She closed the crate and sent it back to Dominic Ashford's address. The next day, the crate appeared again in front of the shop. Exactly as before, Elena sent it back once more, this time with a handwritten note. I already told you I don't need anything from you. On the third day, the crate returned yet again, but this time there was a folded note inside. The handwriting slanted slightly, sharp and controlled, unmistakably the hand of someone used to holding a pen with authority. I know, but these books deserve a worthy home. Elena stood at the doorway of the shop, the note in her hand, and she did not know what she was supposed to feel. Anger at his stubbornness or reluctant admiration for a patience she had never imagined he possessed. She looked at the antique books, let out a quiet sigh, and this time she did not send them back. She left the crate in the corner of the shop, still undecided about what she would do with it. In the third week, Dominic came to the bookshop late one afternoon. Elena was busy helping a regular customer, a retired professor who often came by in search of history books, and she did not realize Dominic had entered until she heard Sophie's tiny voice from the corner of the room. You are the man who knocked over grandmother's books. Elena turned sharply, her heart beginning to race, but she couldn't break off her conversation with the professor. She could only remain where she was, trying to answer questions about a rare volume, while straining to hear the exchange between her daughter and the man she still did not know whether she could trust. Dominic had crouched down to Sophie's height, and he did not try to avoid the little girl's weary gaze. Yes, he answered, his voice gentler than Elena had ever heard it. And I am very sorry for that. Sophie tilted her head. her face thoughtful like a tiny philosopher weighing some great question. Grandmother said, "Real regret means you have to make it right." "I am trying," Dominic answered. There was a brief silence. Sophie looked at him, then asked a question Elena never would have expected. "Do you know how to read books?" Dominic nearly laughed. And Elena realized it was the first time she had ever seen his face hold anything other than coldness or strain. "Yes," he answered. "Mother says, every book has a soul," Sophie went on, her tone solemn as though she were sharing a great secret. "Do you know which one has the best soul?" Dominic lowered himself all the way down, no longer crouching, but sitting on the wooden floor as though a question from a 6-year-old child was worthy of his full attention. He was quiet for a moment, truly thinking. And at last he said, "I don't know. Could you show me?" Sophie smiled, then got up and ran to a shelf in the corner. She pulled out an old leather-bound book, the one Elena knew more intimately than any other in the shop. Her mother's copy of Little Women, the book with the brave soul. "This one belonged to grandmother," Sophie said, holding the book out to Dominic. "She said it had a brave soul. Would you like to borrow it?" Elena finished her conversation with the professor just in time to hear that question. She turned back and the sight before her made her stop still for a moment. Dominic Ashford, the mafia kingpin who controlled half the city, was sitting on the floor of her bookshop with both hands holding her mother's most beloved book, listening to her daughter talk about the souls of books with an attentiveness Elena had never seen in anyone. His face looked different. Gone was the coldness, the arrogance, the threat. He looked like an ordinary man, a man trying to understand a world utterly foreign to him. Sophie glanced at her mother, her eyes brightening. "Mother, this man wants to borrow grandmother's book. Is that all right?" Elena walked closer and looked down at Dominic sitting on the floor. He lifted his eyes to her, and in those gray eyes she saw a silent question. She hesitated. That book was the most precious thing her mother had left behind. She had never lent it to anyone. But then she looked at the way Dominic held it carefully and reverently, as though it were a fragile treasure. And she remembered something her mother used to say. "Books are born to be read, not to lie forever on a shelf." She gave a small nod. Yes, only a single word. But it was the first time Elena Morrison had ever said yes to Dominic Ashford. And both of them knew exactly what that meant. That night there was no moon. The sky was black as though covered with a thick sheet of velvet. Without a single star, without a single thread of light breaking through the heavy cloud cover, Elena sat behind the cashier's counter. The glow of the desk lamp casting a warm yellow light over the stack of bills spread out before her. Sophie had been asleep upstairs for a long time, and the bookshop had sunk into the kind of silence broken only by the sound of Elena's pen moving across the page as she wrote down numbers. This month's rent, electricity and water, the unpaid hospital bills from her mother, Sophie's kindergarten tuition. The numbers seemed to dance before her eyes, red as blood, heavy as stone. She had tried her hardest, worked from morning until night, saved every dollar she could, but the money earned from this small bookshop was never enough. It had never been enough. Elena let out a quiet sigh and looked toward the window. The street outside was deserted, with only the street lamps flickering like tired eyes, struggling to stay awake and keep watch over the night. Her gaze moved to the copy of Little Women resting on the shelf. The shelf Dominic had sent a carpenter to repair the book she had allowed him to borrow that afternoon. She still did not understand why she had agreed. Perhaps it was the way he had sat on the floor with Sophie. Perhaps it was the look in his eyes when he held the book. Perhaps she was simply too exhausted to keep resisting. The sound of heavy footsteps outside pulled Elena from her thoughts. She looked up, every instinct in her sharpening at once. Those were not the footsteps of someone merely passing by. Those were the footsteps of people coming here. She had not even risen to her feet when the wooden door flew open. The crash of wood striking the wall exploded through the silence like a gunshot. 3 men rushed inside, their faces hard as stone, their eyes sharp as knives. They wore black coats, and the way they moved made it clear this was not the first time they had done something like this. Elena stood up, her heart pounding wildly, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "What do you want?" The man in front looked her up and down, a cold smile curving across his mouth. "Are you the woman Dominic Ashford keeps visiting?" Elena did not answer. She neither confirmed nor denied it, but her silence was answer enough. "We are not going to hurt you," the man said, his tone edged with mockery. "We only came to deliver a message." Then he turned to the other two men and gave a small nod. They walked to the nearest bookshelf and swept their arms across it. Books crashed to the floor again, the sound painfully familiar. Elena wanted to scream, wanted to run forward and stop them. But her feet seemed nailed to the floor. She watched the books fall, watched the pages scatter, and it felt as though she were watching her mother's very soul being trampled all over again. But she did not look at the books. She looked toward the staircase leading upstairs where Sophie was sleeping. As long as they did not go up there, as long as they did not touch her daughter. The man in front stepped closer to Elena, close enough for her to smell cigarette smoke on his clothes. "Tell Ashford this is a warning from Vincent Kane. Next time it will not be this gentle." Then he turned away, signaled to the other two men, and they left as quickly as they had come. The door swung on its broken hinges, and the night wind rushed in cold and sharp. Silence. Elena stood in the middle of the fallen books, and her body began to shake. First her hands, then her shoulders, then all of her. She listened for any sound from upstairs, praying that Sophie had not woken, had not seen any of this. There was no sound. The little girl was still asleep. Elena let out a breath of relief, but her knees gave way, and she sank down onto the floor amid the scattered books. She wrapped her arms around her knees. She did not cry, but her body would not stop trembling. This was no longer about money or land. This was about her daughter's safety. Those men knew where she lived. They knew Dominic came here and they would come back. She looked at the telephone resting on the counter and hesitated. Call the police. She knew the police couldn't protect her from men like Vincent Kane. They would come, make a report, offer promises, then leave. And those men would return the moment the police were gone, sell the shop and run. She had nowhere left to go. No family, no savings, nothing except this bookshop and her daughter. Or she looked at the phone and thought of the man who had sat on the floor of her shop that afternoon, listening while her daughter spoke about the souls of books, the man who had sent a carpenter to repair the shelves, who had sent antique books 3 times in a row, who had looked at her with eyes full of regret, the man she still did not know whether she could trust. But at this moment, he was the only one who could help her. Elena picked up the phone, found Dominic's number and pressed call. "Hello." His voice sounded drowsy, but it sharpened at once. "Elena, what happened?" She opened her mouth, meaning to say something calm, meaning to explain everything clearly, but instead her voice broke, trembling and fragile in a way she hated. They came to the shop. There was 1 second of silence on the other end of the line. Then Dominic's voice came back, cold and sharp as a blade newly honed. "Stay there. I am coming now." 20 minutes later, the sound of engines rose outside. Not 1 car but 3. The damaged door was pushed open, and Dominic Ashford stepped inside with Marcus and 2 other men behind him. He stopped in the doorway and took in the books scattered across the floor, the broken door, and finally Elena curled in on herself in the middle of the wreckage. In every encounter he had ever had with her, she had been strong, silent, but unyielding, never stepping back, no matter who stood before her. But now he saw her fragile, shaking, in need of protection, and that made him angrier than anything Vincent Kane had ever done to his empire. Kane had crossed a line that should never have been crossed, and he was going to pay for it. Dominic stepped into the bookshop, his eyes sweeping across every corner of the room like a predator assessing the terrain. He checked the broken door, the toppled shelves, the windows, and the back entrance. Marcus and the 2 men who had come with him stood guard outside, their eyes scanning the dark street. Dominic turned back to Elena, who was still sitting on the floor in the middle of the scattered books. "What did they say?" he asked, his voice controlled, though there was an undercurrent of tension in it that seemed ready to erupt. Elena told him everything from the moment they burst in to the moment they left. She tried to keep her voice steady, but her hands still trembled slightly when she spoke the name Vincent Kane. Dominic listened, his expression unchanged, but his gray eyes grew colder with every word she spoke. When she finished, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Send 4 men here. Guard the place 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Keep it discreet but don't let your attention slip. If anyone suspicious comes within 50 yards, I want to know immediately." He ended the call and looked at Elena. "From now on there will be people protecting you and Sophie." Elena rose to her feet, dusted off her trousers and shook her head. "I don't need your protection. I've lived on my own for 5 years. I can take care of myself." Dominic looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her stop. "This is not about you," he said, his voice softer than before. "This is about Sophie." Her daughter's name rang through the silence like a bell. Elena turned to look toward the staircase where the little girl was sleeping upstairs. Unaware of everything that had just happened, she thought of her child's innocent face, of those large, curious eyes, of Captain Whiskers, the stuffed cat she held every night. If those men came back while Sophie was awake, if they decided not to stop at delivering a message, Elena felt the blood in her veins turn cold. "All right," she said at last, her voice quieter now. "But only because of my daughter, not because of you." Dominic nodded and did not argue. "The reason doesn't matter as long as you are safe." He motioned for Marcus to come inside and help clean up the wreckage while he stayed with Elena. Together, they gathered the fallen books and placed them back on the shelves in silence. When the shop was finally in order again, Elena made 2 cups of tea, and they sat at the cashier's counter, facing each other across the steaming mugs. Outside, the sky was still dark, but the air inside the shop no longer felt as tense as it had before. Elena looked down into her tea, then lifted her eyes to Dominic. "What kind of man are you, really?" The question hung between them. Dominic was silent for a moment, as though weighing how he should answer. Then he looked into his tea and spoke, his voice low and slow. "I am a man who does bad things in order to keep what matters." Elena said nothing, waiting. "My father built this empire with violence." Dominic continued, "I maintain it because I have to. There are people who want to take from us what we have, and I have to stop them. Sometimes through negotiation, sometimes through other means." He lifted his eyes to her. "I am not asking for your forgiveness. I only want you to understand." Elena looked at him and she saw a weary man rather than a frightening kingpin. "I don't understand," she said honestly. "And I am not sure I want to understand your world." She paused, choosing each word with care. "But you kept your word. You did not force me to sell the shop. You sent someone to repair the shelves. You sent the antique books." She looked into his eyes. "And you are here at 2 o'clock in the morning because I called." There was a moment of silence. "So, I don't know what kind of man you are, but I know what you are trying to do." Dominic said nothing, but something in his eyes changed, a small glimmer, like a candle flame trembling in the dark. They sat there until the sky began to pale, speaking little, yet the silence between them was no longer heavy as it had once been. It carried a strange kind of ease, as though they had crossed some invisible boundary together. The next morning, Dominic went to the hospital to see his father. He had not slept after leaving the bookshop, and exhaustion marked his face when he entered Maxwell's room. The old man was sitting propped against his pillows, staring out the window, but he turned at once when he heard his son's footsteps. "You look different, Dominic," Maxwell said, his aged eyes still as sharp as ever. "What happened?" Dominic sat down beside the bed, intending to say it was nothing as he always did. But then he looked at his father, looked at the man who had taught him everything he knew, and decided to tell the truth. "Someone attacked a person I am trying to protect. Vincent Kane's men." Maxwell nodded slowly, not looking surprised. "The woman from the bookshop." Dominic looked at his father, unable to hide his astonishment. Maxwell gave a faint smile, one that deepened the lines in his face. "I am old, son, but I am not blind. You come to see me less often now, but your eyes are brighter each time you do. There has to be a reason." He paused, breathing with difficulty, then took Dominic's hand. Son, I lived a life built on violence. I built this empire, held it, expanded it. But I lost many other things. Your mother left because she couldn't bear this life. I have no friends, only allies and enemies, and I grew old alone. Maxwell tightened his grip on his son's hand. If there is someone who makes you want to live differently, don't let that slip away. That is the thing I regret most. Dominic looked at his father, and he no longer saw the powerful kingpin of years past, but an old man facing the final days of his life and looking back on everything he had lost. He tightened his hold on his father's hand. Understand, father. Maxwell smiled, his eyes drifting closed from weariness. But now go. You have work to do. Dominic left the hospital with a new resolve taking shape inside him. He would protect Elena and Sophie, not only because of the debt he owed Victoria, but because he himself was beginning to care about them in a way he had never expected. And he would end the threat of Vincent Kane permanently. But this time he wanted to find another way. A way that would not require bloodshed. Because perhaps, only perhaps, he was beginning to want to become a different man. A man worthy of the look in Sophie's eyes when she gazed at him and asked about the soul of books. A man worthy of the fragile trust Elena had given him the night before. The restaurant sat on the top floor of a skyscraper in the center of the city, a place where only those with money and power could set foot. Dominic Ashford stepped into the private room at the back, where Vincent Kane was already waiting. The room had been designed with understated luxury, warm golden light, mahogany-paneled walls, and a single dining table placed at the center. The two men sat facing each other, with two untouched glasses of whiskey between them, and a tension so sharp it seemed it could be sliced with a knife. This was the rule of negotiation in their world. No guns, no enforcers, only two kingpins and words that could decide the fate of hundreds of people. Kane leaned back in his chair, a mocking smile curving at his mouth. He was 47 years old, his salt and pepper hair combed straight back, the faint scar along his jawbone like a reminder of battles long past. I hear you have a new weakness, Dominic, he began, his tone mild but dripping with scorn. A tiny little bookshop and a single mother. Fascinating. Kane took a sip of whiskey, his eyes never leaving Dominic. You crossed half the city in the middle of the night for a bookseller. The great Dominic Ashford of old would laugh in his own face now. Dominic's expression did not change. He had learned to master his emotions when he was still a boy, and he was not about to let Kane see even the smallest sign of weakness. What do you want, Kane? He asked directly, his voice cold and calm. Kane set his glass down and leaned forward. The Central District, all of it plus Harbor Point. Dominic nearly laughed. The Central District was the center of his power, where he controlled most of his legal and illegal operations, and Harbor Point was the greatest source of income in the Ashford Empire. Kane was demanding nearly half of everything he had. You know that cannot happen, Dominic replied. Kane tilted his head, and his cloudy gray eyes gleamed with threat. Then perhaps I will pay that bookshop another visit, this time not as a warning. A heavy silence settled over the room. Dominic looked into Kane's eyes and saw that the man was not joking. Kane would do exactly what he said. He would go after Elena and Sophie, and this time it would not stop with a fallen bookshelf. Dominic placed both hands on the table, his fingers laced together, and spoke in a voice cold as ice. Do you want to know why I care about that bookshop? Kane lifted a brow and waited. Not because of her, because of her mother. Dominic spoke slowly, every word measured with care. 3 years ago, she donated an organ that saved my father's life. She did not know who he was. She wanted no money, no gratitude. She only wanted to save a human life. He paused, letting the words settle into the air. And she died. That bookshop is the only legacy she left to her daughter. Dominic leaned forward, his gray eyes hard as steel. If you touch it again, I will not negotiate. I will level everything you have. The northern quarter, your warehouses, your men, all of it. He let the threat hang between them. And you know I don't make threats, Kane. I make promises. Cain studied Dominic with a searching look. He had lived in this world long enough to know when a man was bluffing and when a man was telling the truth. And Dominic Ashford was telling the truth. He could see it in those cold gray eyes. In the way Dominic sat perfectly straight without the slightest hint of hesitation. In the steady voice that never wavered. If Cain attacked that bookshop again, Dominic would go to war. Not a war for territory or power, but a war for vengeance. And Cain knew that Dominic Ashford never took revenge by halves. At last Cain spoke, and the mockery had faded from his tone. An expanded northern quarter, that is my condition. Dominic was silent for a moment, weighing it. An expanded northern quarter was a significant concession, but it was not the backbone of his empire. He could accept it. Fine, he nodded. In return, that bookshop and everyone connected to it will never again appear in your sights. Never. Cain took a sip of whiskey. The first real sip since the negotiation had begun. Fine, but remember this, Dominic. If you betray me, the first place I will come will be that bookshop. Dominic rose to his feet and fastened the button of his suit jacket. If you do that, you will not live long enough to regret it. He walked out of the room without looking back. Marcus was waiting outside, leaning against the side of the gleaming black car. When he saw Dominic emerge, he straightened at once. How did it go, boss? Dominic did not answer immediately. He opened the car door and slipped into the back seat. Marcus got into the driver's seat and looked at him through the rearview mirror. How long will this deal hold? Marcus asked. Dominic stared out the window. The city lights streaming backward like blurred ribbons of light. Long enough for me to put everything in order. Long enough for her and the little girl to have a normal life. The next 2 weeks passed in uneasy quiet. Cain remained silent, making no new moves. The men Dominic had assigned to watch the bookshop reported that nothing unusual had happened. Elena and Sophie continued their daily routine, opening the shop in the morning, closing it at night, and Dominic stopped by from time to return the book he had borrowed and borrow a new one. Sophie began to grow used to his presence and often asked him about the books he was reading. Elena still kept her distance, but she no longer looked at him with the same guarded eyes as before. Dominic began to think that perhaps everything would be all right. Perhaps he had found a way to protect them without bloodshed. Perhaps this time he had done the right thing until the call from the hospital came at midnight and everything changed once again. The telephone rang at 2 o'clock in the morning. Dominic was sitting in his penthouse reading the book Sophie had lent him, Little Women with Its Brave Soul. He looked at the screen, saw the hospital number, and his heart seemed to stop for a beat. Mr. Ashford, please come at once. Your father. Dominic did not need to hear the rest. He already knew somewhere deep inside. He had known this day would come. He had only not expected it to come so soon. He drove through the sleeping city at a reckless speed. Red lights and traffic laws meaning nothing to him now. The hospital corridor was long and cold and white as always. But tonight it seemed longer, colder, and each step he took felt as heavy as though he were carrying the whole world on his shoulders. The 2 bodyguards standing outside the room looked at him with sympathy in their eyes, and Dominic knew he had not made it in time. But when he pushed open the door and stepped inside, Maxwell was still breathing, weakly, with difficulty, but still breathing. Dominic rushed to the bedside and took his father's frail hand in his own. Father, I'm here. I'm here now. Maxwell opened his eyes. And though his body was so weak, he scarcely had the strength to move. His eyes still brightened when he saw his son. My boy. His voice was only a whisper now, but Dominic heard every word as though the old man were shouting. I'm here, father, Dominic said, and his voice trembled in a way he couldn't control. I'm not going anywhere. Maxwell smiled, a faint smile, yet one filled with peace. His eyes looked far away, as though he were seeing things Dominic couldn't see. I've lived a long life, he said slowly, each word costing him effort as though he were climbing a mountain. I did many wrong things, far too many. I hurt people. I lost what mattered. I lived in darkness for too long. He paused, fighting for breath. But the one thing I did right was having you. Dominic felt his eyes burn. He was Dominic Ashford, the man who controlled half the city, the one who could look into the eyes of his enemies without flinching. But at this moment, he was only a son about to lose his father. He wanted to say something. Wanted to say that his father would be all right, that he would recover, but they both knew that would have been a lie. Maxwell squeezed his son's hand one last time, the last strength of a man who had once been the most feared kingpin in the city. Live in a way that is worthy, my son, worthy of the sacrifice of the woman who saved me, worthy of that little bookshop, worthy of the girl and the child. He smiled, and his eyes slowly drifted shut. Don't disappoint me. Then he closed his eyes, and this time he did not open them again. The machines around him gave a long, steady tone, cold and merciless, announcing the end. Dominic remained where he was, still holding the hand that was already growing cold. He did not know how long he sat there. Perhaps a few minutes, perhaps a few hours. Time had no meaning any longer when the person you loved most had just slipped away. The funeral was held the following afternoon, quiet and private, just as Maxwell had lived. There was no notice in the papers. No long line of escort cars. Only a small circle of the people closest to him, standing around the grave in a silent cemetery on the edge of the city. Dominic stood nearest of all, dressed in a black suit, his face carved from stone. Marcus stood behind him with the most loyal of their men, all of them silent, all of them with heads bowed. Dominic watched the coffin being lowered slowly into the ground. And he did not cry. He did not speak. He only stood there like a statue while the world around him went on turning. When the service was over, the others gradually drifted away, leaving Dominic alone beside the fresh grave. He remained there, staring at the stone engraved with his father's name, and he did not know what he was supposed to do next. All his life he had always known the next move. But now, for the first time, he was utterly lost. Soft footsteps sounded behind him. Dominic did not turn around, but he knew who it was. He recognized those footsteps, light and steady, just like the way she had stood her ground before him on the first day they met. Elena stepped up beside him and said nothing. In her hands, she carried a simple bouquet, white lilies, and a few sprigs of lavender. She laid the flowers on the grave, then stood beside him in silence. After a while she spoke, her voice gentle as the wind. My mother believed that the one who receives must live well. She did not donate her organ so the recipient could go on doing bad things. She did it with the hope that the person who received a second chance would value it and live a life worthy of it. Elena looked at the grave, then turned her eyes to Dominic, seeing you beside him, seeing the way he spoke about you in the times I read about him in the newspapers. Think he lived well. He had a son who loved him. She paused, and my mother would have been glad of that. Dominic still looked at the grave, but something inside his chest broke open. The wall he had built over so many years. The wall that had kept him strong and cold, the wall that had separated him from the rest of the world, was collapsing piece by piece. For the first time in many years, a tear slipped down his cheek. Only one, but it was the first tear he had shed since he was a boy. He said nothing. Elena said nothing either. She only stood beside him, and then gently she took his hand only for a moment, a brief touch, warm and quiet. Then she let go and walked away in silence, leaving him alone with his father one last time. But that touch remained with Dominic far longer than any words could have. It told him he was not alone, that someone understood, that no matter how deep the darkness might be, there was still light somewhere waiting for him. Dominic stood by his father's grave until the sun went down. And when he finally walked away, he carried a new resolve within him. He would live in a way that was worthy of his father, worthy of Victoria, worthy of Elena and Sophie. He would not disappoint any of them. 2 weeks after the funeral, Dominic Ashford stood in front of Morrison and Page's bookshop for the first time since the day his father died. He had spent those 2 weeks putting everything in order, from Maxwell's will to the legal formalities, from stabilizing the empire to making certain no one used the vacuum of power to stir up trouble. He had been so busy that he had not had time to stop and truly feel the pain. But now, standing before the little bookshop with its wooden sign faded by time, he felt as though part of the burden was being lifted from his shoulders. The shop had been fully repaired. The bookshelves he had once smashed were now sturdy and new. The glass door gleamed, and inside the books stood neatly on their shelves, like soldiers at attention, ready to welcome him. The afternoon sunlight poured through the windows and laid a warm golden wash over everything, making the small bookshop look like a peaceful refuge in the middle of a noisy city. The bell above the door chimed when Dominic stepped inside. And less than 3 seconds later, a small figure came rushing out from the corner of the room. "Uncle Dominic." Sophie ran to him, her tiny feet tapping across the wooden floor, and she threw her arms around his leg as though he were the dearest person in the world. Dominic stood there, startled by the child's reaction. He was used to people fearing him, avoiding him, or lowering their heads before him. But Sophie was different. She tipped her face up toward him, those large emerald eyes exactly like her mother's, filled with concern. "Are you sad?" Mother said. "Your grandfather went away. Very far away. He cannot come back anymore." Dominic knelt down to her height and he realized that he was smiling, even if only a little. "I'm sad," he said honestly, "but seeing you makes me less sad." Sophie tilted her head and thought for a moment as though weighing a matter of great importance. Then suddenly she ran off and came back holding Captain Whiskers in her hands. "Hold Captain Whiskers," she said, pushing the worn old cat into Dominic's hands. "When I am sad I hug Captain Whiskers, and I am not sad anymore. Captain Whiskers will help you." Dominic took the stuffed cat. And he felt his heart soften in a way he had never expected. This was Sophie's most precious possession, the thing she held every night, the thing she never let out of her sight, and she was offering it to him because she thought it would help him feel less sad. He looked at the cat with its faded button eyes and fur worn thin by time, then looked back at Sophie. "Thank you," he said, his voice gentler than it had ever been with anyone. "But I think Captain Whiskers should stay with you. You need Captain Whiskers more than I do." He handed the cat back to her. "I only need to know that you are here. That is enough for me." Sophie took Captain Whiskers again, but she kept looking at Dominic with worried eyes. "Then when you feel sad, come here." "All right. I will let you hug Captain Whiskers." Dominic nodded, and this time his smile truly reached his eyes. "All right, I promise." Elena stepped out from the back room, and when she saw the scene before her, she paused for a moment. Dominic Ashford, powerful mafia kingpin, was kneeling on the floor of her bookshop, talking to her daughter about a stuffed cat. The image was both strange and warm in a way she couldn't explain. She came closer, and Dominic rose to his feet when he saw her. In her hands was an old notebook, its leather cover worn, and its pages yellowed with age. "Dominic," she said, her voice carrying a trace of hesitation. "I found this while I was sorting through my mother's things. I think you should see it." She held the notebook out to him. Dominic took it, not understanding what it was. He opened it, and inside were lines of handwritten words in the soft, slanting script of a woman. It was Victoria Morrison's journal. He turned through a few pages, skimming entries about daily life, about the bookshop, about Elena when she was a little girl. Then he stopped at a page marked with an old ribbon. The date on that page was more than 12 years earlier. "Today I met a strange man." Victoria had written. "I was having trouble with some debt collectors. They came to the shop, threatened me, broke things. I did not know what to do. Then he appeared. I don't know where he came from, but he walked in and looked at those men with an expression that made them step back. He did not need to say much. He only said, 'You go on now. I will handle this.' And I did. When I came back, those men were gone and they never returned. I don't know who he is. I did not have time to thank him, but I will remember his face. One day, I will find a way to repay him." Dominic turned the next page, and he froze where he stood. There was a newspaper clipping, and in it, the face of a man had been circled in red ink. Maxwell Ashford. Beneath the clipping Victoria had written, "I found him. Maxwell Ashford. Now I know who he is. A businessman, they say, but I know he is many other things besides. That doesn't matter. He helped me when I needed it without asking for anything in return. One day, if the chance ever comes, I will repay him." Dominic stared at the notebook, and suddenly everything became clear. His father had helped Victoria years ago, a small act that he had probably forgotten almost as soon as it happened. Maxwell did things like that often, helping one person, clearing a path for another. Not because he was kind-hearted, but because that was how he built his network of influence. But to Victoria, it had meant far more than that. She had remembered. She had searched. And when she learned Maxwell needed an organ donor, she had not hesitated. She had repaid the debt with her own life. Elena stood beside him, watching the expression on Dominic's face change from confusion to understanding, from understanding to emotion. "My mother always said," she spoke at last, her voice light as the wind, "kindness never disappears. It only travels in circles." Dominic looked at her, then over at Sophie, who was sitting in the corner of the shop with Captain Whiskers in her arms, reading a picture book. The circle had closed. His father had helped Victoria. Victoria had saved his father, and now he was standing here in Victoria's daughter's bookshop, watching her granddaughter read beneath the afternoon sun. Perhaps this was not the end. Perhaps it was only the beginning of a new circle. 8 months later, the city gained a new landmark. A modern high-rise rose into the blue sky, its glass facade catching the sunlight like a giant diamond in the heart of the city. This was the project Dominic Ashford had pursued for years, the very project that had led him into that little bookshop on that long-ago day and caused so much destruction. But now, as he stood looking at the completed tower, Dominic realized that the most important thing was not the soaring floors or the gleaming glass exterior. The most important thing stood at the very center of the main plaza, where a small bookshop with a wooden sign still stood firm amid all the modern elegance surrounding it. Morrison and Page's, Elena's bookshop, Victoria's legacy. The architect had called it the heart of the project, and the newspapers couldn't stop wondering about the unusual design. Why would a major corporation preserve an old-fashioned little bookshop in the center of a billion-dollar development? Dominic never explained. Some stories are not meant to be told to the whole world. On opening day, Dominic stood in front of the building in a gray suit, watching the crowd and the reporters gathered around. He had delivered the necessary remarks, shaken the necessary hands, and offered the necessary polite smiles. But the moment he had been waiting for most was when a small figure came running out of the bookshop, blonde curls flying in the wind. "Uncle Dominic, Uncle Dominic." Sophie ran toward him, her little feet moving quickly across the newly laid granite. "Mother's shop is the prettiest, prettier than that building." She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the bookshop where Elena was standing in the doorway. And when Dominic saw her, he stopped. Elena was smiling. Not the polite smile she usually offered customers. Not the smile that hid the weariness he had so often seen. This was a real smile. The kind that reached her eyes and made her emerald gaze shine as though sunlight lived inside it. "Thank you," Elena said softly when he came near. Dominic shook his head. "I did not do it for your thanks." Elena looked at him, the smile still resting on her lips. "No. That is exactly why I am thanking you." Marcus appeared beside Dominic and spoke in a low voice, just loud enough for the two of them to hear. "Boss, Kane has pulled out of the city. Looks like he is expanding his territory somewhere else. He is no longer interested in us." Dominic nodded, his eyes still fixed on Elena and Sophie. "But stay in contact, if there is any movement at all." "I understand," Marcus replied, then quietly stepped away. Kane was still out there. The threat had not disappeared entirely, but for now at least Elena and Sophie were safe, and that was what mattered most. Late that evening, after the opening celebration had ended, and the city lights had begun to glow, Dominic returned to the bookshop. Sophie was asleep upstairs. Captain Whiskers folded in her arms, and the shop had sunk into a gentle and comforting silence. Dominic and Elena sat on the front steps outside the shop, looking out across the new plaza where the lights shimmered against the glass of the tower. They sat side by side in silence for a long while, with neither of them needing to say anything. Then Elena spoke, her voice soft but filled with quiet seriousness. "Will you leave that world, the mafia world?" Dominic did not answer at once. He looked up at the night sky where the stars had been dimmed by the lights of the city. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Perhaps not completely. It is a part of me whether I want it to be or not. It is my father's legacy. The thing I have spent my whole life building." He paused. "But I am building something else now. Something my father wanted to see before he died. Something worthy of your mother's sacrifice." Elena was quiet for a moment, her fingers absently brushing the edge of the stone step. Then she asked more softly than before, "And me? Where do I belong in all of this?" Dominic turned to look at her, and in those cold gray eyes, Elena saw something she had never seen there before. Sincerity, gentleness, and perhaps a little hope. "You are the reason I want to change," he said. Silence followed, but it was a warm silence, not a heavy one. Elena rose and went inside the shop. When she returned, she carried the old leather-bound book, Little Women, the one Sophie had lent to Dominic. The book Victoria had said possessed a brave soul. "My mother wanted you to have this," Elena said, holding the book out to him. He took it and felt its weight in his hands. He opened the front cover, and inside on the inner page, there was a line written in Victoria Morrison's hand, something he had never seen before. "Kindness always finds its way back." They stood facing each other in the evening light, between the little bookshop and the high-rise tower, between the past and the future, between what had been lost and what might still be found. There was no kiss, no declaration of love, only a promise held in silence, that they would meet again, that this story was not over, that perhaps after all the ashes, something was still beginning to bloom. Outside the windows of the bookshop, the city continued moving with all its schemes and secrets. Somewhere, enemies were still waiting in the shadows. Somewhere, debt still remained unpaid. But inside Morrison and Page's, among the old shelves and the scent of yellowed paper, something was growing. Not love, not yet. Only the possibility of it. And sometimes that possibility is more than enough. Today's story closes here. But the lesson it leaves behind will continue to echo in each of our hearts. This is a story about kindness, about the way one small act of goodness can create circles that travel far beyond anything we can imagine. Maxwell Ashford helped Victoria Morrison many years ago without asking for anything in return. Victoria remembered and repaid that kindness with her own life. And the circle continued when Maxwell's son met Victoria's daughter. When two worlds that should never have crossed found one another between old bookshelves. Life is much the same, my friend. Every act of kindness we plant today may become a seed that blooms for someone tomorrow. We never know where our kindness will go, whom it will touch, or which life it may change. But that is not what matters. What matters is that we continue to give, that we continue to believe this world is still worthy of our kindness. If this story has touched your heart, please press the like button to support our channel. Share this video with the people you love. The people who need to be reminded that kindness is never forgotten. It only travels in circles and will always find its way back to us. And if you have not yet subscribed, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the moving stories we bring you each day. We would truly love to hear your thoughts. What did this story make you think about? Has there ever been a moment in your own life when kindness found its way back to you in the most unexpected way? Please leave a comment below and share your own story. We read every comment and treasure every word you share with us from the bottom of our hearts. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a life filled with joy and peace in every day ahead. Remember that no matter how difficult life may become, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. And there are always circles of kindness waiting to find their way back to you. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.